So, welcome to Creating from the Heart, the Artistry of Living. I'm here with Chief Dion Campbell in Michigan City, and we're going to just have a wonderful conversation today, and we hope you learn something.
Yeah.
So, Chief Campbell, how did you get into this business? Have you always wanted to be in law enforcement, or did something happen in your life that said, this is what I'm going to do? How did this happen?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you for inviting me to come on. It's an honor and a privilege, and I absolutely love your heart for inspiration and giving people insight into what it takes to make a difference in this world. That is greatly appreciated. So it's one of the reasons why I don't do a lot of interviews, but the subject matter and your approach I thought was tremendous. So I said this was something that I needed to do. Oh, how did I get into law enforcement? You know, I've always wanted to help people. I've always wanted to serve. I had just recently graduated from Indiana State, and my degree was in radio, television, and film, and that's what I had originally wanted to do. And I was newly married, but I wasn't able to pay the bills. And so, you know, being in local radio, my wife was like, I know you have passions and dreams, but we need to get these bills paid. And so my father knew very well the warden at LaPorte County Sheriff's Department, and they were hiring at the time. And I thought it would be an interesting challenge to work in the jail, and with the possibility of maybe becoming a police officer. I liked the idea of returning back to the community where I was from and being able to help people. And I truly got into the profession because I saw it as an opportunity to help people. And I met with them, interviewed with my father's friend, and he ended up hiring me. And that's how I got into law enforcement. My first stint was at the LaPorte County Sheriff's Department. And then after that, I worked security for Oprah Winfrey for about a year. She had a home in Rolling Prairie, Indiana.
I remember that.
And then after that, I was hired by the Michigan City Police Department, and I've been here for 22 years. And it's just been a very wonderful experience being able to serve in my hometown.
My goodness, that's a long time.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
That's amazing. And your wife doesn't have any regrets, and you don't have any regrets?
No, I think the one thing that I had to learn was to make sure that I did not take my job home with me.
How do you do that in this field?
I think first and foremost, you have to build a very secure home. I think in any profession that you have, home is like a foundation. It's like the core. You know, if people who work out and are into physicality, they will tell you that if the core is strong, then everything else is strong. And I think that early on, we took the time to build strong family life. And that empowers me and enables me to do what I have to do. And I just think being very conscious of how this job affects you and making sure that I did self-care was critical to her being able to handle what I do for a living.
Right.
You know, I protected them, kind of kept them away. You know, being a police officer can be very dramatic. It can be very traumatic as well. People don't call you when everything is going well. They call you when things are very difficult. And so kind of, if you would imagine what that would do to your psyche if for 8 hours a day, 4 to 5 days a week, all you did was enter into traumatic situations, and your job was to resolve those situations or to help people who were in traumatic situations.
Right.
You get to see all the negative parts of life. And if you're not very careful, that thing that you see every day could become a part of you, and it could literally change your personality. And so, you know, for my wife and I, one of the things that I had to do, I had to be very conscious of the changes that were happening in me and be very deliberate in articulating my heart to her. One of the things I understood is if that the heart changes And the world of law enforcement, or any job that you enter into, it has a way of changing you, but your spouse doesn't know anything about that world.
Right.
And the person they married, if you're not careful, you can become another person, then unrecognizable after a while if you fail to communicate your heart position to your spouse. You know, one of the tragedies of law enforcement is that a lot of times, because of the adverse situations that you're in, a lot of people end up getting a divorce in law enforcement.
Right.
It's one of the tough aspects of being in law enforcement, is that it's really tough on marriage and it's really tough on relationships. But I think us understanding home life, putting value on home life, making sure, and I call it, we learn to journey together. And I think that was very critical, learning to journey together and to share the contents of our hearts, that when I changed and when things were affecting me, I didn't leave her sight. She always had sight of who I was, and she could help reel me in and keep me grounded. So that was very important.
It's very interesting to me how then what is in many ways, I think, required is that not only you are giving to your community, but that the people, all of the people, even the kids that you live with, understand that they are giving to the community too, by being part of your family and by supporting you as you go through this.
You bring up a very valid point. And I would always have conversations with my children, and that was part of their struggle, is they just wanted to be normal. They just wanted to be able to be kids and not be in the spotlight. But because of what I did for a living, they were placed in a bubble, and people expected them to be perfect. And my kids are not perfect. My kids make bad mistakes like anyone else's kids, and they've made mistakes, but it almost seemed to them like it was magnified. And if they are not careful, if I'm not careful, then they can end up despising what I do because how it affects them. And that's been one of the family struggles, is to make sure we secure our children's heart and to try to keep them away from this as much as possible. But it was very, very difficult. You know, this is a small town, and you grow up in, and everyone knows your father is a police officer, and they've had to deal with being called, they call it an op, or someone who's going to tell them, your dad's a cop, so you're spying on us, you're watching us. And they had to grow up with that stigma, and they had to develop tough skin at a very, very young age. And that part was difficult for them, but on this side of that, they've come out very well.
They'll be better for it,
yes,
I bet.
Yes.
So as you sit here, I know one of the things that you like to do is to inspire people to become police officers or to be part of a community in many different ways. What do you say to someone who's considering becoming part of law enforcement?
It's not so much what I say, it's what I do. And I use my position to impact the hearts of people, to make them better people. Law enforcement is not for everyone, and I realize it. It takes a very special person to get into law enforcement, but I realize the responsibility that comes with this job. And for me, I use it as an opportunity to inspire young people in particular. I also use it to inspire people who came up like me, whether you're white, black, biracial, whatever you are. I understand what it is to struggle. I didn't grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth, and I understand what it is to struggle. And I use my struggle and my triumphs and my victory to say, look, I know what it's like. I grew up on the west side of Michigan City. While I was growing up on the west side of Michigan City, my dad was in prison. We had nothing. We struggled greatly, but through hard work and watching my father develop and grow and become a phenom himself, and go from being incarcerated to making over 6 figures a year, and then making great investments and accumulating some wealth. I think that story is relatable to today's generation, because they'll look at someone who they deem to be successful, like, oh, you got it made, you don't have my issues, you don't have my problems. And I can boldly say, no, that's not true. Let me tell you my story, and let me tell you what it took for me to get to where I am. And then look, I am no different from you. You have the capacity to do what I'm doing. I would love for you to come into law enforcement, but I want you to be great in whatever you do. And so that's the inspiration for me, is to utilize this position to inspire people to be great. Law enforcement is not for everyone, especially in the times and the generation in which we live. It takes a special person to be in law enforcement, because law enforcement has gone through many ebbs and flows, especially over the past 3 years.
Right.
When COVID hit, people love first responders. Hey, police officers, thank you for what you're doing. We love you, so forth and so on. Right. Then when the protest hit, we hate police officers. Keep them away. Let's defund the police. We don't want you around us. Don't stop us. Don't do anything. Then when crime skyrocketed, everyone said, where are the police? Right. And so I think our society as a whole has not landed just yet on where they want or what they want their police department to look like.
Right.
I think that in Michigan City, where we live, I think there's a lot of love and embracement and understanding of law enforcement. But it's so interesting to me how something could happen in Philadelphia, or something can happen in Seattle, or something can happen in Los Angeles or Chicago, and the narrative that they have there, people will try to impose that here,
right,
even though we don't have the same dynamics. Right. And that's the negative power of media, is that these strong images of hate and division that go forth can be localized, and we can impose things that are happening on a national level here.
Yeah, like you can have a protest that shows up.
Correct.
That has nothing to do necessarily with your community.
Correct.
Has to do with the world community. That
is correct. And that's what happened in Michigan City. We hadn't had any of those grievances. Not that our department is not without its sin. Everyone has their sin. But we don't fall into the narrative that was created nationally. But yet we had 1,000 people descend on a town with under 31,000 people.
Right.
And that was one of the most difficult things that anyone on our department had ever done. And it's one of the proudest moments that I've had being on this department, to see how the men and the women responded to such an adverse situation.
Well, it was interesting because, as I understand it, there was even a police officer who got hit with a rock or a brick or something, and you just moved on. You just kept doing what you were doing and weren't distracted by that challenge.
Yes, our department took an empathetic stance. We all agreed to a T that what happened with George Floyd was a tragedy. And so we were empathetic. People want to peacefully protest. We have no issue
problem
with that, and that was going forth. But when you start destroying property, or when you engage in violent activities, that's where we have to draw the line.
Right.
And one of our officers literally got hit in the head with a brick. And so that really crossed the line. And I was so proud of one of our supervisors who was on scene when that happened. And he had to make a split-second decision. Do we engage the crowd that had increasingly grown violent, or do we stay the course and keep things going despite the action that took place that actually made it allowable for us to engage the crowd?
And how did they do that?
I think just from training. I think having insight. I think the conversations that we had, that we understood that this one act wasn't representative of our community, because realistically, the people that were here, a majority of them were not from here. Some of them were professional protesters. A lot of them came from out of town. There were different organizations that were here. And even though it was staged as a Black Lives Matter protest, it really wasn't that. There was an undercurrent of an anti-government group that was pushing and propelling things forward. And that set the stage for what we had. And I just think from our training, I think the officers truly love this community. And we decided to stay the course and see if we could use de-escalation tools instead of getting violent. And
so what happened?
We talked them down. We began to talk to the crowd. We got into the crowd. We began to talk to some of the people that we knew. And once we began to reason with them, talk with them, engage them, we built relationships with people in our city. And I think that engagement brought things down, and people realized, hey, this is my hometown. I'm not going to get with these shenanigans. And they left, and that caused other people to leave. And so it worked out very well for us. Wow. And it was just came from being able, the relationships that we had built and having the courage to get out and talk to the people and allow them to express themselves while giving our opinions. And I think that made the biggest difference.
So what would you say to someone who came to you and said, I'm ready to be a police officer?
I would say, especially to young people, one of my sayings that is very dear to me is that leaders are born for the times that they are needed the most. I think that my generation is a generation that has a lot of wisdom. We grew up with distinct values and things that were very common and normal to us. The world has changed so much that the things that we held as normal are no longer normal. So I think it's our generation's job to teach and embed those principles into the younger generation. But I would say to this younger generation that you were born for such a time as this. This generation understands how this world works. They understand how society thinks. And I think that this is one of the greatest and most challenging times to be a police officer, but it's also very, very rewarding. And I think that if you desire to be a police officer, it's one of the greatest times to do it, because the world needs strong, effective communicators who are not only warriors, but they are also guardians. They see themselves as that. Because in law enforcement, you can no longer just see yourself as a warrior. And that's what we have been taught traditionally.
Right.
But in this day and age and going forward, I think we have to be both warrior and guardian. We will always stand up against the darkness of this world, the level of evil that would try to intimidate and impose itself on the entirety of this world. But a lot of what we do is just being a guardian of the community, because realistically, officers are nothing more than community members pulled from the community to serve the community. Right. And we have to keep that at the forefront. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of evil in this world. And when it's time to stand up and be a warrior, we will do that. But there has to be a distinct balance between being a warrior and being a guardian.
Perfect.
Yes.
I appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Chief Campbell. And we hope you've enjoyed this, Creating from the Heart, the Artistry of Living. Please come again.